A battered MiG-29, 2 American bombs, and a desperate mission through Russia's deadliest defenses. Will he make it home? At exactly 2:32 in the afternoon, a Ukrainian MiG-29 clawed its way into the sky, hauling weapons that, in truth, were never meant to exist on that airframe. Beneath each wing hung an American-made GBU-62 JDAM ER, jury-rigged onto NATO racks with nothing more than voltage regulators and strips of electrical tape. To most eyes, it was a relic of the Cold War, patched together with faith and grit. But in less than 15 minutes, that old fighter would be asked to do the impossible, threading its way through the deadliest air defense grid on Earth to deliver 1,000 pounds of GPS-guided democracy onto a Russian ammunition dump. I still remember the first time I heard the sound of a search radar turning hostile. The pilot would have felt it in his bones, the tone in his headset shifting from broken chirps into a steady, unrelenting warble. The S-400 had locked him. At that distance, its 48 N6 missile could reach him in barely over a minute. He dumped chaff, metallic clouds blooming in his wake as he shoved the MiG into a steep dive, trading altitude for speed like every combat flyer has done since the dawn of jets. But war has a cruel way of punishing every move. The chaff didn't just blind the S-400. It lit him up to every passive sensor within 60 miles. Soon enough, a roving Su-35 patrol was racing in from the northeast. His altimeter unwound past 25,000 feet, airspeed climbing through 600 knots. For a moment, the S-400's grip slipped, its radar struggling against the interference and violent altitude change. Still, solving one danger often opens another. His radar warning receiver screamed fresh alarms, the sharp electronic pulse of a Buck M3 acquisition radar. He had dropped himself right into its sweet spot, the very altitude band, 15 to 30,000 feet, where that system was built to kill. And unlike the long-reach S-400, which took time to calculate an intercept, the Buck could fire in under 20 seconds once the geometry lined up. That meant the clock was ticking on his weapons. The GPS alignment sequence had to finish now, or the bombs would fly blind. Leveling out at 20,000 feet, he forced himself to fly straight, 15 long seconds of vulnerability, while his onboard computers whispered with satellites overhead. The alignment bar crawled across his display, 40%, 60%, 80%, and then a new threat appeared. A Su-35, 60 kilometers out, closing at Mach 1.4. At that speed, the Russian fighter would be in missile range in under 3 minutes. The GPS sequence finished just as his missile warning gear shrieked, the Su-35's radar shifting from search to a deadly narrow lock. It was time to move. He threw the MiG hard to the right, then snapped it back into a brutal S-turn, the kind of maneuver that forces enemy operators to dump their firing solution and start from scratch. Effective, yes, but every defensive move was burning the fuel he desperately needed to get home. I've seen young pilots ignore that math before, thinking their tanks were bottomless. They never make that mistake twice, if they live long enough. His gauge already showed an extra 200 kilos of fuel gone, a margin he could not afford. Keep flying like this, and he would soon face a cruel choice: finish the strike or make it home alive. The Su-35 stalking him was no amateur. That Russian wasn't charging straight in. He was calculating, herding the MiG into a trap. It's a classic hammer and anvil play. Fighter up top, surface-to-air battery below. The Su-35 would drive him right into the S-400's kill zone, just like a sheepdog steering prey into the wolf's jaws. Turn away from the fighter, and he'd eat a missile from the ground. Evade the SAM, and the Su-35 would have him dead to rights. No good options, only bad ones. Meanwhile, his display lit with fresh target data from Malanka. Satellite imagery, just 6 hours old, showed vehicle convoys, movements consistent with a massive ammunition transfer. The 39th Guards were stockpiling, preparing to push toward Poprok. That strike could cripple their offensive for weeks, maybe longer. But getting there meant threading a needle, interwoven SAM belts ahead, a Russian ace on his tail, and a fuel gauge already glowing close to red. And then, as if the sky itself was conspiring, the Russians flipped the table. Without warning, GPS jamming slammed down like a sledgehammer. His navigation display fuzzed into static as their electronic warfare units flooded the spectrum with noise. The JDAM ERs instantly shifted to their backup INS guidance, but accuracy degraded in a heartbeat, from near pinpoint 3 meters to a sloppy 30 feet. Against a hardened bunker, that margin might mean the difference between a clean kill and a very expensive crater in the parking lot. As if fate enjoyed piling misery on misery, the MA-12 ejector racks, the standard NATO bomb release hardware, chose that exact moment to throw a fault code. I've seen it myself, the tiniest weak link exposed under the strain of real combat. Ukrainian technicians swore those voltage regulators would hold, but war has an unforgiving way of finding every crack in the armor. Now came the kind of choice that can break a man. To reset his weapons system meant killing his defenses. 30 long seconds with no radar warning, no countermeasures, flying blind while a Su-35 prowled behind him and SAM batteries tracked from below. But without that reset, the bombs would never leave their racks. I can tell you from experience, combat often corners you with decisions where survival and mission success pull in opposite directions, and every second of hesitation can be fatal. He started the reset. One by one, his defensive screens went dark, leaving him naked in the most hostile airspace on Earth. The effect was immediate. Without the protective haze of jamming, the Russian Panzer's thermal cameras picked him out like a spotlight against the cold sky. Electro-optical sensors don't care about electronic noise. They hunt heat, and those MiG engines burned like twin beacons. 20 seconds in, he saw them. The first two 57 E-6 missiles clawing into the sky, contrails streaking white across the afternoon haze. No warning tones. His RWR was still rebooting. Instinct saved him. He yanked the stick left and rolled inverted, dragging his body through 7 crushing Gs. The barrel roll kept him alive, but it came at a price. His afterburners gulped down 800 pounds of fuel in less than a minute, fuel he didn't have to spare. His gauge was already flirting with bingo, the minimum needed to limp back across friendly lines. From here on out, every desperate maneuver bought seconds of life, but stole miles from his journey home. His systems blinked back online just as the Panzer missiles detonated harmlessly behind him, their proximity fuses tricked by his chaff. But the Russians weren't done. The optical lock remained, forcing him to punch out flares in a last-ditch effort. The burning magnesium fooled the seekers, yes, but now he was broadcasting like a lighthouse, visible to every sensor across both radar and infrared spectrums. For a brief moment, the cockpit lit with something rare, a green board. The voltage regulators had stabilized, his improvised racks finally reading ready. I had to shake my head when I first heard this story. 3 years ago, the idea of bolting American smart bombs to a Soviet MiG was laughable. Now, Ukrainian technicians made such miracles a daily routine. Fresh intel pulsed onto his screen through a secure data link. The Malanivka depot had grown busier in just the last hour. New vehicles arriving, and signals intercepts confirmed the 110th Guards Motor Rifle Brigade had linked up with the 39th Guards. 2 elite Russian units preparing something big. The strike's value had just doubled. But so had the danger. The Su-35 pilot trailing him was patient, smart. He wasn't rushing in, just holding a 25-mile leash while the ground defenses softened the kill. It was a chess game in 3 dimensions, and the Russian was waiting for the checkmate. As the MiG closed on the target area, his fuel readout gave him no comfort. Barely 5,300 pounds, just enough for a straight-line run home. Any more high G evasions and he'd be landing on fumes, if he lived to land at all. The bombs had to be released within 4 minutes, or the mission was dead on arrival. That kind of countdown doesn't just test your jet, it tests your soul. I've seen it before. Men and machines pushed past limits, clinging to seconds that feel like hours. Out there, the difference between success and failure is often measured in heartbeats. The Su-35 tightened its hunt, 40 kilometers off his 6. The Russian switched from broad search to single-target track. The MiG pilot's RWR shrieked, the unmistakable tone of the No-35 radar in firing position. In moments, an R-77 would be airborne. That missile could pull 40 Gs, shrugging off chaff or flares once its active seeker went live. Against that kind of predator, survival depended on geometry, not luck. He broke perpendicular to the threat, a textbook notch maneuver, forcing the radar to struggle to maintain lock. 90 degrees off the beam, his motion blurred into the ground clutter. For a fleeting instant, he vanished into the noise. I've pulled that trick myself. When it works, it feels like a ghost slipping through a hunter's grasp. When it fails, well, there's no second chance. But war punishes every solution. That defensive angle carried him straight across the silent trap of a Tor M2 battery. The moment he entered its engagement zone, the system came alive, launching within the lethal reach of its 9 M338 missiles. Now he was caught between converging fires. Russian steel behind him, Russian steel ahead. Defend against the Su-35 and risk the Tor. Turn toward the Tor and give the fighter an easy kill. Stay the course and be torn apart by both. War never plays fair. The target still lay 90 kilometers away. Too far for a clean JDAM drop, even with extended range kits. Physics and geography were conspiring against him. His only option was to weave the needle. He rolled inverted, pulling into a split S that dumped him toward the deck. In seconds, the MiG flipped from northbound at 15,000 feet to southbound at 10,000. Terrain rose between him and the Tor battery, forcing the Su-35 to recalculate his intercept. But diving brought its own curses. Denser air meant higher fuel burn, faster depletion. Every foot of altitude traded away meant less glide range for the bombs. I've watched more than one pilot win the fight, only to discover they'd lost the fuel war. Passing through 15,000 feet, he fired off his entire flare suite. 60 blazing pellets scattered behind the MiG, each a false heat signature for infrared seekers. It saved him from the Tor's backup optical trackers, but created a new devil to contend with. His trail now burned like a beacon. The Russians would know exactly where to look. The Su-35's OS-35 infrared search and track system locked onto the flare cloud, sifting through the false suns until it picked out the real heat of the MiG's engines. Now the Russian had him on a passive leash. No radar emissions, no warning tones, no mercy. I've seen this game before. When the enemy goes dark, you're already halfway in the grave. Desperate, the Ukrainian pilot switched on his targeting pod, needing one last visual confirmation before release. The old Soviet optics strained at this altitude and angle, trying to paint a building 50 miles away through afternoon haze. The picture came back grainy, broken, barely enough to outline the ammunition depot. But the JDAMs didn't care about pretty images. They only needed coordinates, accurate within a few yards. His display read 5 meters, good enough for government work, as we used to say. In his head, the pre-release checklist ticked off like a prayer under fire. GPS antenna aligned, though degraded by jamming. Warhead fuses armed for delayed penetration. Release parameters marginal at best. Each straight second would sharpen accuracy, but hand the Su-35 a steady target. And the Russian finally pulled the trigger. One R-77 screamed off its rails, climbing past Mach 4. Impact in 58 seconds. He forced himself to stay straight for 3 more eternal seconds, letting the JDAM computers refine their lock. 15 kilometers to release, close enough to glide, though with accuracy bleeding away. He had no choice. This wasn't a mission with luxuries. The straight run also gave the Tor battery its opening. 2 missiles leapt skyward, staggered, each from a different intercept angle. The first forced him to brake hard, straight into the path the second was designed to cut. In 3 seconds, he had 7 to solve an equation with no right answer. I've sat with that math before. There are no tricks, no miracles, just the cold ledger of physics. His fuel readout bled down to 4,200 pounds. The afterburners drank his lifeline dry. Every pilot knows the truth. Speed is life, altitude is insurance, fuel is time. And he was spending all 3 accounts at once. Betting everything on reaching weapon release before the clock hit 0. Decision time. Commit to the attack run and trust speed, countermeasures, and fate, or abort and try to claw his way home empty-handed. 70 kilometers ahead, the ammunition depot waited. Behind him, the R-77 closed. Below, the Tor's missiles rose like claws. He had 5 seconds to decide between glory and death. He chose. Full afterburner. Nose down 10 degrees. Racing for the release point while death rushed in from 3 directions. The R-77 went active, its seeker painting the MiG with its own radar. It no longer needed guidance from the Su-35. The missile now hunted on its own. There was no hiding, no tricks left. The missile knew exactly where he was. Time to drop. He smashed the release switch at exactly 14:47. Nothing happened. I've seen that nightmare before, too. The moment when a weapon you trusted betrays you, not through treason, but through cold mechanical failure. In war, even steel has a way of breaking your heart. The first JDAM refused to leave the rack. The MA-12 ejector had frozen, voltage faults and stubborn mechanics sealing the bomb in place. God help him. Missiles screamed in from every quarter, yet the weapon clung to his wing like dead weight. I've seen this nightmare before, when the thing that's supposed to save you instead drags you closer to death. He hammered the release again and again, fists tight on the switch as G-forces crushed him into a defensive brake turn. Behind him, the R-77 twisted through the sky, bending physics with maneuvers so sharp they'd have torn a lesser aircraft in half. 10 seconds to impact. Above, Tor missiles climbed past 26,000 feet, their fuses armed and searching. 5 seconds to impact. And still he carried a bomb that should already have been on its glide path. Time for manual override. He yanked the emergency release handle, feeling the cold mechanical linkage bite through stubborn steel. With a wrenching jolt, the first JDAM finally tore free, wings snapping open as it dropped into program glide. But the release came at the worst moment, midway through a 7G turn, well outside normal parameters. The weapon tumbled, brain lagging behind body, its GPS receivers struggling to reacquire satellites through the spin. The second bomb came away clean. A small miracle in the middle of hell. At last, both JDAMs were autonomous, their onboard computers quietly plotting glide paths while the pilot fought for his life. At first, the weapons diverged, confused by the off-axis release, then slowly bent their flight back toward the target, still 37 miles ahead. The R-77 arrived. Soil pulled maximum Gs. Vision collapsing into a gray tunnel. The missile's proximity fuse solved its math, found the perfect fragment pattern, and detonated. Shrapnel tore into the MiG's tail, punching holes in hydraulic lines, severing control cables. The jet shuddered like a wounded animal but kept flying, barely. I've flown birds hit that way. They don't fly, they limp, and every control input feels like wrestling a dying beast. Dropping low saved him from the Tor's missiles, which lost him in ground clutter. But it drove him straight into the teeth of a new threat. Shilka anti-aircraft guns ringed around the target, 423mm cannons per vehicle, radar-guided, spewing tungsten into the sky. At that altitude, there's no room to dance, too low to escape, too battered to climb, and burning his last fuel just to hold a straight line. That's the cruelty of combat. Survive one trap and the next is already waiting. The JDAMs carried on their silent journey, adjusting course every few seconds, blind to the chaos around them. GPS jamming had crippled their primary navigation, forcing them onto backup inertial guidance. But these were smart bombs in every sense. They matched terrain contours against stored maps, correcting their position with each passing mile. At 2:53 p.m., the first bomb reached Malanka. Its 500-pound warhead, packed with nearly 200 pounds of high explosive, burrowed into the ammunition depot before detonating. Then came the chain reaction. Artillery shells cooked off in rapid succession, Grad rockets exploded in their crates, small arms ammunition crackled like 1,000 firecrackers. The blast tossed a BTR-82, a 16,000-pound beast of steel, 50 meters through the air like a toy. Windows shattered 3 miles away as the shockwave rolled outward. 45 seconds later, the second JDAM struck the command post. The building that coordinated the 39th Guards and the 110th Guards simply ceased to exist. Radios, planning maps, officers and staff, all vaporized in a single instant. In the space of a minute, 2 elite brigades were left leaderless and scrambling, their careful offensive plans drowned in smoke and confusion. The MiG pilot, broken bird though it was, turned the towering column of smoke into cover, limping west at barely 200 meters. Hydraulic fluid streamed from the fuselage, every tug on the stick biting back at him. His fuel gauge read less than 900 pounds, 10 minutes of flight if he nursed it gently, 5 if combat forced his hand. I've seen men do the math in that cockpit. It isn't numbers, it's minutes of life left on a clock you can't stop. The Su-35 pilot, calculating as ever, turned back rather than chase into the teeth of Ukrainian SAM coverage. Malanka burned, and it kept burning for hours. Each secondary explosion was more than just fire. It was tons of ammunition denied to the front, shells and rockets that would never rain down on Ukrainian soldiers. The Russian push toward Popros dissolved into smoke. And so it ended. Not with parades, not with speeches, but with 2 American bombs strapped to a Soviet-era fighter, held together by Ukrainian ingenuity and a pilot's stubborn will to finish the mission. I've seen many wars. The weapons change, the faces change, but the truth does not. In the end, it is courage and improvisation that turn the tide. That day, over Malanka, it was enough. This has been a fictional story, crafted for educational and entertainment purposes. It does not promote war, nor does it glorify violence. It's a way to reflect on history, technology, and the courage of those who face the impossible. If you'd like more stories like this, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you won't miss the next one. Until then, stay sharp, stay safe.